Hello and welcome. In this video I wanted to do something different but still look at a list and make a video about some AdMech content as I haven't done so for a little while. And why this video will be a little bit different is we'll be looking at an Adeptus Mechanicus 2000 point list, but one that is not necessarily a top 4 list, but one that is still very interesting and one that kinda has a few interesting ideas. It's one that can use a little bit of work and did reasonably okay within a tournament. So after we look at the list itself, I'll go over some suggestions on how to improve it, what changes could be made, and my thoughts about the list and tournament play as a whole. So with that being said, let's begin by looking at the list. This is a 2000 point list that came in 8th place out of 21 players in a tournament held on May 7th in Michigan, United States. This list is composed of a Lucius battalion, which is rather standard for AdMech, and as all battalion detachments do, it begins with a HQ choice, being a Tech Priest Dominus. In this case, the Tech Priest Dominus is the warlord of this army list. The Dominus has been armed with a Macro Stubber and a Volkite Blaster, so nothing too out of the ordinary yet, and has been given the trait and the relic for this army. The trait that this Dominus has been given is the Necromechanic, and the Necromechanic says that when he uses his Master of Machines ability, the target regains up to 3 wounds instead of up to D3 wounds. This does give you a little more consistency, but as far as warlord traits go, this is a rather weak one and there are definitely much better choices. And as for the relic, the Dominus has been given the Omniscient Mask. The Omniscient Mask is a reasonably popular relic, as it says that friendly melee attacks within 6 inches of the bearer of this relic score an additional hit when rolling an unmodified 6 to hit. This relic can add quite a few additional hits, depending on what kind of units accompany it. So the relic itself is perfectly fine, though usually we'll see this relic on something like a Princeps of an Infiltrator squad or a squad of Rust Stalkers as opposed to a character, but there are definitely reasons where you would want to run this relic on a character such as a Dominus. Following the Dominus, the second HQ choice of this battalion detachment is a Skitarii Marshal. The Skitarii Marshal has not been given any upgrades, which is a little bit perplexing, but the Skitarii Marshal is a fine enough inclusion as it is, and there are situations where you would run a non-upgraded Skitarii Marshal. After these 2 HQ choices, there is an additional non-force organization HQ choice, which utilizes the Brotherhood of the Cog ability on an Engine Seer. This Engine Seer has not been given any upgrades either, and is just there for his special abilities, which is perfectly fine as Engine Seers have been seeing more and more play, and generally don't need any relics or traits to perform their function within an army list. Now this list so far is rather standard, but where it gets a little bit interesting is when we move on to the troop choices. This list includes 3 different troop choices, the first one being a unit of 6 Kataphron destroyers. And this is the first time we're seeing Kataphron destroyers in one of my videos, as they're a little bit rare but they do show up in different lists. This just happens to be the most recent list that I wanted to look at that has featured them. So don't discount them completely, though they are generally a more fringe unit than any other troop choices within the AdMech forces. These 6 destroyers have been given 6 Plasmic Culverins and Cognis Flamers, and this is an interesting choice as well, as usually we'll see the destroyers armed with heavy grav cannons as opposed to Plasmic Culverins, as the output of both is similar enough, though the Plasmic Culverins do hit a lot harder and do have a decently higher strength profile, thus making them a little bit better against high toughness targets in comparison to the mid-range firepower of the heavy grav cannons. Following this unit of destroyers comes the second troop choice, which is simply a unit of 13 Skitarii Rangers armed with no special war gear except for a power sword. And then the third troop choice for this battalion detachment is a unit of 12 Vanguard armed with no special equipment except for an Arc Maul. This is an interesting set of troop choices, and we'll go over them a little bit more once we've completed looking at the list as a whole. After the troop choices, we come to the elite choices, with the first 2 elite choices being 2 units of 5 Infiltrators armed with Taser Goads and Flechette Blasters, which seems to be the most popular outfit option for a unit of Infiltrators, though there are definitely situations where you would be happy with the Power Swords as well. And after the 2 units of Infiltrators, we come to the 3rd and 4th elite choice, being 2 Cybernetica Datasmiths. And both these Datasmiths come with no upgrades, though they do signal that there are going to be Castellan robots within this list. It's interesting to see that there have been no upgrades, as so far we haven't seen any characters utilizing some of the better war gear that Lucius has to offer, and do keep that in mind as it'll be more relevant as we continue looking at this list. The 5th and final elite choice is a unit of 5 Hoplites. The hoplites are a Forge World model that comes as an upgrade kit to the Skitarii troop choices, and they have an interesting set of weapons, being an arc lance that gives them a strength of 6 in both melee and shooting, as well as 1 armor penetration and 1 damage. The mag shield is a decently fine item as well, as it gives them a respectable 5+ invulnerable save that goes up to a 4+ invulnerable save within melee combat and allows them to reflect 1 mortal wound whenever they make an invulnerable save on an unmodified 6. This actually can be rather good and makes them a rather interesting melee option for the Adeptus Mechanicus forces. Though do note that they are a Skitarii unit, so they only gain access to Doctrinas but do not gain access to Forge World benefits, making them a little weaker than other choices within your army. Though even with that being said, their melee capabilities are solid enough that I've seen them included within various lists. However, within the 9th edition codex, their popularity has fallen off a little bit. And with that being said, we've covered all of the elite choices, and we can move on to the fast attack choices. The first of the fast attack choices is a unit of 2 Iron Striders, and both these Iron Striders are armed with twin Cognis las cannons, which is the optimal weapon choice for the Iron Striders within the 9th edition rules. This does give you a decent amount of anti-tank capabilities, and Iron Striders do continue to show up within various lists. After the Iron Striders comes the second fast attack choice, which is a unit of Cerberus Raiders. The Raiders used to be very ubiquitous within 8th edition and early 9th edition, though after the various changes that they've experienced, they have fallen off a little bit and have seen less popularity, though they do seem to be making a bit of a comeback within the recent meta. And after the unit of Cerberus Raiders, we have the third and final fast attack choice, being a unit of 3 Cerberus Sulphur Hounds. The Cerberus Sulphur Hounds have always taken a backseat to the Cerberus Raiders, but they do bring a decent amount of mobility and output with their different weapons to the table, and oftentimes see play alongside the Cerberus Raiders. They've definitely seen a little bit of a bump due to the decline in power of the Cerberus Raiders, though they still are a bit of a fringe unit. I do think they're a little bit underrated, and I think they should be seeing a little more play than they do within various lists, so it's good to see an inclusion of them here. And now with the fast attack choices being covered, we come to the final allocation of this list, being the heavy support choices. As we saw those 2 Cybernetica Data Smiths, we do have a unit of Castle Robot, in this case being 4 Castle Robots composing the first heavy support choice. And these Castle Robots have been given the following loadouts. The first 2 of these robots have been given 2 Fists and an Incendiary Combustor. The second of these 2 robots have been given triple Phosphor Blasters, meaning that they have 2 Castle Phosphor Blasters and 1 Heavy Phosphor Blaster. This is an interesting loadout, and I'm guessing it has to do with the 8th edition codex, as back then they were unable to mix and match their different weapons, so it's probably a carryover, and it's one of those things that shows that you should really consider magnetizing your units, as even though you don't expect to use that configuration in the future, you never know what kind of changes Games Workshop might make. I've definitely fallen prey to this myself, as I didn't think that the Arc Claw on the Kataphron Breachers would be going away anytime soon, and as such I was left scrambling trying to swap them out on a few of my Kataphron Breachers with Hydraulic Claws when the 9th edition rule set came out. And now that we've covered that, we can proceed on to the 2 other heavy support choices included within this list. The second and third heavy support choices are composed of Onager Dune Crawlers. Both these Onager Dune Crawlers are armed with 2 Cognis Heavy Stubbers and neutron lasers, which further increases the anti-tank capabilities of this list. And that's everything that's included within this army list. So now that we know what's inside of this list, let's discuss it in a little more depth. To begin with, this is a tournament list, but it's very obviously not optimized and very obviously just a mix of different models that the player kind of enjoyed. But even though this is the case with this list did come in 8th out of 21 players, and this should probably clear up some misconceptions about tournament play as a whole. I think a lot of people have this idea that tournament play is very cutthroat and everyone's playing a very optimized cookie cutter list, when in reality every tournament is going to have a very wide variety of players with different skill levels and with very different list builds. There are obviously going to be some players who are more advanced, and their time and effort in past tournaments is going to be rewarded with them coming in within a higher ranking of that tournament. However, even if you bring a list that's more composed of models that you just want to play, and one that's not fully optimized, you can still have a really good time at a tournament and enjoy yourself and do rather well. And don't forget, we've all started out somewhere, so it's a matter of getting the practice in and trying out different things. And as a player myself, I oftentimes enjoy bringing a bit of a more weirder list. However, there's nothing wrong with using a meta list either, as sometimes you don't want to reinvent the wheel and simply play an army that you like the look of, as someone else has had a similar idea and refine that list. And with that being said, I also think it's important to mention that looking at this list, I'm guessing there were some model limitations that this player encountered. The first thing that I clearly notice is that most likely this is composed of 2 combat patrols, as there are 6 Kataphron models, an engine seer, at least 20 Skitarii, and 2 Dune crawlers. So this is definitely a list that can be built out of the combat patrols, and one that you can kind of consider when building an army. In addition to that, I think the reason there are 2 data smiths is because this player had to fill up some points, and included the second data smith because they purchased 2 boxes of Castle robots, which include 2 data smiths in total. And finally, the reason you see the weird numbers with the Rangers and Vanguard is most likely because they have a total of 30 Rangers and Vanguard, and they built 10-man squads, and then had an additional 10 bodies, 5 of which became hoplites with an upgrade sprue, and the others they split between the 2 different units. The Power Sword and the Arc Maul are most likely the result of them building what they thought looked cool, and that's perfectly fine if you just want to build some models that you think look cool. Now with that being said, let's talk about how this list could be improved and what changes could be made. Assuming that you have a limitation of models and this is what you have to work with, there are ways of optimizing an Adeptus Mechanicus build without changing what's in the list. The first few things I would say that can be changed without changing the model composition is I would change the relics and traits within the list. I would definitely consider dropping the Necromechanic, as I can see that the idea of this player was probably to escort the unit of Castle and Robot, or maybe even the unit of Hoplites and Infiltrators, and essentially benefit their melee attacks, while being able to heal up either the robots or the Dune crawlers when they take damage. However, the problem with this idea is that there are significantly better warlord traits that the Dominus can take. For example, the Luminescent Blessing of the Lucius Forge World is an incredibly powerful ability that can do quite a lot of work with some of your different units, as it really bolsters their durability. In addition to that, the different holy orders can also help with the durability and output of your various units. One other thing I would say is that the Omniscient Mask would probably be better served on a Princeps of the Infiltrators, as mentioned previously, or on some other character, and something like the raiments of the Technomartyr might be better on the Dominus. But the Omniscient Mask can stay on the Dominus and still be fine, as the Dominus can be a perfectly fine melee option that escorts one of the other units into combat. As for the Skitarii Marshal, I would say that you really want an Exemplar's Eternity, especially if you have a unit of Rangers or Vanguard that numbers over a model count of 10. The Exemplar's Eternity definitely helps the Skitarii Marshal perform much better within the game and makes him better than Dominus in terms of buff capabilities when targeting Skitarii units. Now there's one other relic that I think should have really been included, which is the Solar Flare from the Lucius Forge World. This is a relic that I think is the biggest problem with the Codex at this current time because it is locked within a specific Forge World. The Solar Flare and items similar to it, such as the Veil of Darkness within the Necrons, is an incredibly powerful ability, and having it restricted to a single Forge World does really skew the Forge World capabilities within the Adeptus Mechanicus forces. And as the Castle robots have become a lot better with their points reduction, it has increased the power of the Solar Flare in a very heavy way, as the Castle robots do have a limitation in their mobility, and being able to teleport them into a specific location, especially with how good mixed builds on the Castle robots is, has definitely created a situation in which you're kind of forced into Lucius in many cases, which definitely reduces the diversity of the different Forge Worlds you'll see play within the Adeptus Mechanicus forces. And that's a real shame, as I do think a lot of the other Forge Worlds have a lot of very good options, and it's just kind of not very good when you're restricted in that situation. I wish they made the Solar Flare a more generic relic and gave Lucius something interesting in place to compensate for that change, as the Datasmiths can really benefit from being able to teleport those Chalcedon robots. One other change I think this list could make without actually changing any of the models included within it is that unit of 6 Kataphron destroyers. The difference between 5 and 6 Kataphrons is not particularly great, and bringing them up to a unit of 6 does expose you to some blast rules that can be a little bit unfortunate, especially on such a high cost, high impact unit as those destroyers are. And there are 2 ways to kind of approach this change, as you don't really have anything like a Techno-Archaeologist that benefits the Kataphrons themselves, any of the Holy Order Warlord traits that benefits the Kataphron destroyers, and you're not playing something like the Agrippina Forge World that has a stratagem that improves their toughness. You could very easily split them up into 2 units of 3 Kataphron destroyers with those plasma cannons, thus giving you a little bit more versatility in mobility and making it a little harder for your opponent to target any individual unit of your Kataphron destroyers. However, if you don't want to split them up in that sense, you could always drop 1 Kataphron destroyer and pick up some Holy Orders or some other upgrades throughout the list. And speaking of other upgrades, I'll definitely recommend picking up Omnispexes, on the unit of Rangers and Vanguard, as both units are more than 10 models and would benefit from an omni-specs within their squads. In addition to that, I would decide early on which unit my Skitari Marshal would be accompanying, and once that is decided, I'll give the other unit a data tether so that they can move independently of the Marshal and benefit from some of the different abilities as needed, in that way giving you more ability to spread out some of your different benefits throughout the army as a whole, and thus giving you more power in general. This would really enable you to take advantage of some of your different buffs and some of your different abilities within your Adeptus Mechanicus list, as the AdMech forces really depend on being able to stack those different buffs and utilizing them to their full efficiency to work as a well-oiled machine. Now, what other changes can be made to this list? Well, there are some changes you can make if you're willing to change out some of the models. The first thing I would say is the plasma culverins are not the most exciting and do compete with the heavy grav cannons in a lot of different ways. I would say if you definitely want to retain some plasma culverins, as they're not the worst weapon in the world, I would definitely split up the unit of 6 Kataphron destroyers into a unit of 3 and 3, giving yourself a mix of plasma culverins and heavy grav cannons so that you can have the different shooting profiles, as this list does seem to have a little bit of a limitation in its mid-range fire capabilities. The other thing I would change is swapping out the weapon configurations on the Castle and robots. Right now, with the double phosphor and the double fists, you have a total of 12 Castle and phosphor shots, a total of 8 Castle and fist attacks, and an additional 6 basic Castle and attacks that come in with no armor penetration and their base strength. Though if you give all of the Castle and robots a mix of a Castle and phosphor blaster and a Castle and fist, you go up to a total of 12 fist attacks and you retain a total of 12 Castle and phosphor shots. This means the number of shots you get does not change in any way, and while you lose 2 attacks at their base profile, you pick up a total of 4 Castle and fist attacks, which is much more devastating than their basic attacks. As such, I think that'll give you a lot more mileage, though in this case I think it's more of a situation where the player built these Castle robots and can't really swap them out easily without having to do a lot of work on their models. And finally, one other thing I'll say about the Honored Dragoon Crawlers is that I don't know how good the Neutron Laser is. Obviously, it's an incredibly heavy-hitting weapon and the strongest range weapon that the Adeptus Mechanicus forces have. However, consider the following: even though this list can't include another unit of Iron Striders, as it has the full allocation of 3 fast attack choices within a battalion detachment, it could potentially swap out one of those Dune Crawlers for a Scorpius Disintegrator armed with a Pharamite Cannon. Because let's look at it this way: the Neutron Laser gives you D3 heavy shots at a 48-inch range with 12 strength, 4 armor penetration, and D3 plus 3 damage, but is a blast weapon. The Pharamite Cannon, on the other hand, gives you a consistent 3 shots at that same 48-inch range with a strength of 8, 3 armor penetration, and 3 damage. It is also not a blast weapon, so it does have more utility if your opponent ever gets your Scorpius Disintegrator within melee combat. Don't forget that in addition to these 3 Pharamite shots, you do get an additional D6 heavy shots from the missile launcher, which come in at a strength of 7, 2 armor penetration, and D3 damage. This missile launcher is a blast weapon, so it cannot fire within melee combat. And on top of that, you get 12 Cognis heavy stubber shots, which isn't bad in general either, as it does help you fight your way out of close combat when you find yourself in that situation. Though on the other hand, the Scorpius Disintegrator is a little more fragile than the Honored Dragoon Crawler, as the Honored Dragoon Crawler does have a 5+ invulnerable save, and the Scorpius Disintegrator does not have any invulnerable save in itself. Though with that being said, I do think there definitely is a case to be made for the Pharamite Cannon in situations like this, where you want a little more anti-tank capabilities, but don't have the openings within your army list to include additional Iron Striders or other options. Though that being said, you can always include something like the Stratoraptor, so that is always an option if you want to go that route. In any case, I do think this is an interesting list, and I do think it's a good opportunity to take a look in both how you can change things without changing the models, and changing things by changing a few models in some minor ways. In addition to that, I do think it was good to take a look at a list like this because, once again, I want to reiterate that you can show up to a tournament and with a non-optimized list and have a ton of fun just playing the models that you enjoy within your army and still do reasonably well, as this list did come within the top half of the tournament. At the end of the day, if you're having fun, that's really what's important, and you want to come away with any tournament learning some different things about your army. I'll also finish off by saying that there were other armies similar to this, which included a mix of Kataphron and Skitari units, with one including breachers instead of destroyers, and even including a knight, but it was a Forge World knight known as a Knight Styrax. So I wanted to take a look at this list as it included the destroyers and was built more out of the combat patrol. There have been lists in the past as well that did rather well, which just include Kataphron breachers as their troop choice, alongside things like the Iron Striders and Scorpius Disintegrators, so there's always the option to mix in that sense as well, without including Skitari troop choices. Anyway, if you guys like this video, let me know in the comments below, and I can do more videos like this in the future with either Adeptus Mechanicus and other army choices as well, if this has been a good learning opportunity for you guys. And as always, thank you for watching, and if you know anyone who may benefit from this content, please do share, as it really does help the channel out, as well as those who may benefit from the content. As always, I want to give a big thank you to my patrons. You're all awesome people, and as always, have a great day. Bye.